Okay, great. Thanks, Jess, and good afternoon, and welcome everyone. I'm Scott Earnest. I'm the Acting Director for the Office of Construction Safety and Health at NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And as part of the NORA Construction Sector Council, along with CPWR, ARTBA, and others on the panel, we're happy to be part of this first national safety stand down to prevent struck-by injuries. I wanted to thank each of you for joining today and for the work that you do every day to prevent deaths and injuries to construction workers in work zones. I also wanted to mention that this is a virtual stand-down event because of the COVID-19 pandemic that we are all working to defeat. Before we get started, let me just mention that Jessica Bunting is online from CPWR to handle any technical issues and assist as needed. If you're experiencing any difficulties with WebEx or with your audio, just message her in the chat box or shoot her an email responding to the WebEx registration or reminder emails. She's also recording today's webinar, and that will be shared with everyone in a follow-up email after the event. Struck-by injuries are part of the Focus 4 hazards in construction. The Focus 4 hazards represent the cause of nearly 50 to 60% of all construction fatalities each year, and that includes falls from elevation and on the same level, struck-by incidents from vehicles and flying objects, caught in between, such as trench collapses and rollovers, and electrocutions. We received a lot of great questions during the registration process, and we'll be hearing responses to those during the first part of the webinar. Following that, the panel will then spend some time answering live questions. We encourage you to submit those questions in the chat or Q&A box at any time. We probably won't get through all of them, but we'll be adding related resources to the main Work Zone Safety page on cpwr.com following today's event. And we'll share that link today and in the follow-up email with the recording. So, our panel presenters today are first Brad Sant. He's a Senior Vice President of Safety and Education for the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. He has over 30 years of experience overseeing construction, safety, and health programs, and he'll be moderating the panel discussion. We also have Dave Fosbroke, who's a statistician at NIOSH in the Division of Safety Research. He's conducted several years of research to better understand and address the risks workers face when working around operating construction vehicles and equipment. Travis Parsons is the Associate Director for Occupational Safety and Health for the Laborers Health and Safety Fund of North America. He brings over 25 years of experience working in safety, and his main areas of focus include worker safety and health, hazard awareness and correction, and ergonomics and overall site safety. Dave Dostaler is the Vice President of Safety for Kraemer North America. His career as a safety professional spans 29 years and includes projects in 47 states and a dozen countries. And then finally, Jerral Wyer serves as a Director of Occupational Safety Division at the Texas Department of Transportation for over 25 years, before retiring in 2018. During his tenure with the Department of Transportation in Texas, they successfully reduced injuries from 1,600 to 200 per year. So again, thanks to all of you for joining us, and Brad, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate that. And if I may, just as I get started here, just to share with you a little bit of background on this program and how it came to be. Scott, as he noted, represents NIOSH, and NIOSH has a number of what we call sector councils that look at different research opportunities in the various occupational safety areas across the country. And our council, the Construction Sector Council, is the one that worked together to bring this national stand down together. Of course, initially we intended to do something more live as a traditional stand down, but due to this pandemic, we've pivoted and now we're doing this virtually. I'd also like to provide a lot of acknowledgement to CPWR, and particularly Eileen Petit, who works there and has worked a lot behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, helping us put together the stand down and creating materials that are available on their website for all your reference, and all this stuff is provided at no cost. And again, the chair of the Struck By subgroup, Mike Mills of Liberty Mutual Insurance, also provided a lot of opportunity to all of us to prepare. So let's get started with our presentation. So this is what we hope to be the first of many annual national stand-downs to prevent struck-by incidents. We have purposefully co-located and co-timed our stand-down with the National Work Zone Awareness Week because such a large sector of the struck-by incidents and problems in the construction industry come in the heavy and civil industry, particularly in roadway construction work zones. And we'll look at some of that data in just a moment. But of course, struck-by incidents can happen in any industry, and so all industries are invited to participate and join with us as we prepare these national stand-downs every year in April. So why do this? Why do we care? Why do we think it's important to do a stand-down on struck-by incidents? Well, it's driven by the numbers and the data. If you see the chart that's before us right now, struck-by fatalities have been increasing lately in construction from a low of 73 in 2011, at least looking back at the past decade, to a high of 112 in 2019, and that's just fatalities. If we look at the injuries, they are likewise significant. We reached a peak in 2016 with nearly 20,000 struck-by injuries in the construction sector, and now they're about between 16 and 17,000 annually. So it's a significant problem of death and injury in our industry, and that's why we're taking a look at it. So let's look at how construction fares against all other industries and why this is such a significant issue. As we see overall, construction makes up a little less than about 6% of the U.S. workforce. So all those workers in construction make up about just under 6% of the U.S. workforce. Yet, when we look at struck-by injuries, the construction sector accounts for 12% of the injuries and 17% of the fatalities. So as you see the struck-by injuries, you can see why they become part of the focus for issues in construction or hazards because of the number and the reason it hits us so hard. So breaking down construction even a little bit into its various sectors, we can see that the highway, street, and bridge sector has the most fatalities of any other sector in the industry. However, the plumbing, heating, and air conditioning subsector has the most injuries of any sector. And then if we simply look at rates, the number of people employed versus the number getting injured, masonry seems to have the highest number of injuries. So there's different ways to slice and dice the data, but when it comes to fatalities, and typically that's probably in construction because we're dealing with struck-bys from heavy construction equipment as well as intrusions into the work zone from motorists that happen to drive by. So you can see why that becomes a bigger issue for fatalities, where the injuries are more prevalent in industries where you don't have that such heavy and large size of equipment. If we look at the struck-by vehicles, which is the number one cause again of fatality, we can look that between 2011 and 2018, there were nearly 5,000 non-fatal injuries in construction. That's non-fatal injuries with vehicles. But during the same period, there were 502 fatal injuries in construction. So in 2018, construction accounted for 20% of the struck-by vehicle fatalities. Remember, making up less than 6% of the workforce. So that was all this data that has driven us to the point to think that struck-by is a huge issue in the construction industry, and a reason we need to pay attention, stop, do a stand-down, talk about it, and think about ways we can better prevent these type of injuries going forward. So as we looked at this as a Construction Sector Council and tried to determine how do we get information out, what information is needed, what information can we pull together, we created a survey to look at this information and to kind of find out what the industry is feeling about it. What is the industry feedback on that? And so during the first 2 weeks of March of this year, this NIOSH work group that I've mentioned, the NORA Construction Sector Council, struck-by work group, put out a survey to find out what everyone is thinking about struck-by incidents and how relevant they are to our industry. We wanted to add more understanding to the factors that contribute, kind of have a better understanding of the awareness of National Work Zone Awareness Week and see if that was a good place to put our national stand down, and also to look at materials and information that employers could use to look at and to train workers to prevent these types of injuries. So these were all the things we were looking at, and then finally to inform our work group of how we can make a pathway forward. So as we did our survey, we had pretty good response. We had 243 industry stakeholders who responded to the survey. About 42% of those worked for a contractor, 16% for a union, 13% for a government agency, and 8% reported they worked for a trade or professional association, and the other remaining 20% was a group of other industries, including such as insurance and manufacturers and universities. So those were the participants in our survey. And then when we asked which industry segment they work in most frequently, of those responding to the survey, 37 said commercial construction, 22 heavy and civil, 12 industrial, 10 in the public sector, and then so forth going down to research and education. So that's kind of who was responding to this survey. And what was the experience of those people that responded? So they had actually quite a significant amount of experience. 88% of them said they had more than 10 years of experience, and most of them had had firsthand experience with struck-by incidents, with just over half having been directly involved in either witnessing or being involved in a struck-by incident or fatality, and a third said they'd been a victim of one. So again, people that have been very involved and had cared about this issue. And so when we asked those who had witnessed or had been involved in a struck-by incident, if that had caused a change in their workforce or if anything had changed as a result, most of them, 86%, said that it had changed as a result of those incidents in their industry that they had witnessed or seen, but only 47% said that change lasted. It didn't stick. It was kind of a big reaction, and then it stopped. So now again, this was based on industry response, not necessarily on the data, but asked them what were the primary causes that they felt were the reasons for struck-by incidents. 22% selected construction equipment as the primary cause, followed by falling tools and objects, trucks and construction vehicles at 18%, flying particles or objects are 15%, and then motorists, intrusions, those coming from outside of the construction industry being 13%. And the other interesting 12% selected complacency and inattention as part of their other, as cited there. So this is their feeling, and as you see, as you go back to the data that we shared based on information that we received from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it was actually pretty close. The industry response was not far off from what the actual causes were. So getting down to, I guess, the nitty-gritty. What did they say are the biggest barriers to preventing struck-by incidents? And here we see in these charts a number of interesting answers that our survey responders identified. And the biggest barriers for most employers and workers to preventing struck-by incidents, they both said scheduling pressures and lack of training were like two of the number one barriers, whether you're looking at for workers or employers. So interesting responses that we are getting there. Now, the last part of our survey, we asked, what do you need? What can we provide you to help you manage your safety, to deal with these issues that are going there? And when they said there were two materials they felt would be most effective in raising struck-by hazards, they said Toolbox Talks, that's what topped the list, followed by posters on job sites. And so we have developed a number of Toolbox Talks, infographics, English and Spanish. They can be blown up into posters for a response, and they're all found on the Work Zone Safety web page that the group has established, the Struck-by Work group has established, as a central source for training and materials. So a number of groups have posted their materials on this site on CPWR. It's referenced in our posters and in the materials that you received. And you can go there to receive Toolbox Talks, posters, training materials, just tons of information that have been put there by both the public and private sector to help you prepare for your own stand-downs and to train your workers and any others about how to avoid struck-by incidents. And here's the source of that. You can see the website here, and that you'll be able to see a lot of the information provided by a number of organizations, from NIOSH to OSHA, CPWR, Labor's Union, ARTBA, and any others that have provided them there. And all the resources that are provided on this webpage are provided, again, at no cost. They're free to use. All right, so that gets us to our panelists who have been selected here and are going to answer some of the questions that you have submitted to us. And so let's just go ahead and get started with those. And I think, Scott, since you kind of kicked us off here, let's talk about one of those issues that a lot of perception of what are the main causes of struck-by incidents here. The question is, it says true or false. The majority of struck-by accidents relate to tools or materials being dropped from overhead by coworkers. Scott, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Yeah, I was looking into the data on that, and when you start talking about struck-by accidents, you really need to divide it into the fatal injuries and the non-fatal injuries. So first, when you're looking at data on fatal injuries, the answer is no. There's a 2017 CPWR quarterly data report on struck-by incidents in construction that found that between 2011 and 2015, there were 384 fatal struck-by vehicle incidents, and there were 420 fatal struck-by objects and equipment. But among that 420 fatal struck-by objects, roughly about 51% of those were related to dropped objects. So 51% of that is 214 dropped objects. So again, the answer to that when it comes to fatal injuries is no, that the majority of fatal injuries are not related to dropped objects. But when you start looking at non-fatal injuries, the numbers are different. So for non-fatal injuries, if you look at the data that's available, the plumbing, heating, and air conditioning construction subsector had a higher number of struck-by object injuries than any other subsectors in construction. They had 3,100 workers that suffered injuries in 2015, and that was followed by pouring concrete foundations in residential. And then the masonry contracting subsector experienced the highest rate of struck-by object injuries, and that was 48.2 injuries per 10,000 workers in 2015. So again, it's not entirely clear, but it really needs to be broken down into fatal injuries and non-fatal injuries when you look at these numbers.
Thank you, Scott. Practitioners. So this may be for a contractor point of view. I'll ask Dave Dostaler and Jerral, maybe from the DOT point of view, and even David Fosbroke, who did a lot of research in this area. Any of you or all of you can answer this question. What is your number one rule or code of conduct that could most effectively prevent on-site struck-by incidents? What change could we make, according to you, that could affect that? So let's start that question with Dave Dostaler. Oh, we're not hearing Dave. Maybe he's on mute. So let's jump to Dave Fosbroke.
How's that?
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Dave.
There we go. That's good. In the roadway construction industry, I'd say one of the big things that we have besides just training is internal traffic control. We have a lot of people working in a small area, and the struck-by hazards obviously increase quite dramatically. So within this internal traffic control plan that we set up for each of those spots, we talk about flagging, we talk about parking, staging, no overlapping of other activities, so we're not having a haul route run right through the center of the activities, and then communicating that with all employees and subcontractors in the area. So that is probably the number one item that we would have in our industry.
Great. Dave Fosbroke, how would you respond to that one?
So I'll pick up on what Dave said. In our doing research with internal traffic communications, one of the things that we did early on was a training session on what are internal traffic control plans. And we held a meeting that included paving foreman and plant operator and the site supervisor and state supervisor, your QA, QC subcontractors, the truck boss, the safety director. We got everybody together, and amongst other things, one of the things we did was brainstorm on what are the specific things that should happen on this site to reduce risk of workers being struck by operating equipment. And it was really interesting how often we heard back, we've worked together with each other for 30 years, and we've never talked about this subject before. So that concept of communicating between the different individuals that are operating on the site becomes critically important. And, of course, that's a critical part of the internal traffic control plan.
Thank you, David. Jerral, coming from the DOT and the public sector point of view, how would you respond to that question?
Well, this is big, Brad, and both Dave and Dave commented on a key element, which is internal traffic control. But in the industry, first thing we need to do is call time out and understand we got an issue and a challenge here. And unless we change something, the numbers that you shared earlier, and unfortunately the fatals, will continue. So organizations and leadership have to be willing to look in the mirror and change. And I was very fortunate in nearly 30 years total with an organization that finally one day said, we got to change. So internal traffic control became more than just a topic. It became a process. And that process was communicated, coached, training, any and every material that we, NIOSH and ARTBA, two great organizations that helped with this initiative. But it all started with, we got to change and call time out, talk about it, and then you've got to act on it and not just leave it as being a challenge or opportunity or a problem. You got to act and do something different, and that's where we made the difference.
Perfect. So let's just take a step further from this. We've been talking a lot about internal traffic control. Is there ever a point that you think it would be best to just take the ground workers out, the spotters and flaggers, and use technology? And maybe we can turn to the laborers and Travis Parsons for that. I mean, at what point do you look to technology to replace personnel, and is that even feasible to do?
Yeah, thank you, Brad, and thank you for the previous comments about internal traffic control plans. That seems to be a common concept here. So establishing those, and in short, the answer is as much as possible. Whenever you can separate workers from vehicles and heavy equipment, like dump trucks backing up or even moving forward, it's the best practice to separate workers from any vehicles. Understanding that you are cramped for space and you might have limitations, that's not always possible. But do it as much as possible, as much as you can separate them out by establishing worker-free zones, and especially where there's a lot of backing going on. You should actually try to eliminate backing as much as possible as well. And I had my answer here, just like everybody's talked about, keeping in mind internal traffic control plans. So that's very key to this. And part of that planning process is looking at the mix between workers and vehicles, and when they do have to interact, making sure that everybody is safe. You have your appropriate spotters, you have your flaggers in place. You know, they're inherent and part of the safety program when we talk about your internal traffic controls. And then the last thing I'd like to mention, and I saw in your surveys earlier, is everybody has to be properly trained up and trained on these controls and what the process is from the beginning of the project to the end. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. So let me come back to a question that's recently come in here. talking about the timing of when these work zone accidents take place. And maybe we'll jump over to you, Dave. When is there a difference between day work and night work? When do these likely happen? And is day work or night work more dangerous than is night work more dangerous than day work? Yeah.
Thank you, Brad. As we look at the data, we can certainly say that there are more highway construction workers who are killed during the day than at night. But of course, we have a lot more work, even though we have increasing amount of night work happening during the day than at night. We can't really address the issue of risk in terms of the fatality rate in daytime or light conditions versus dark, because we don't know the exposure, i.e. the number of workers or person hours at work during day or night. But what we do know is we know that night work presents specific hazards. And so what we want to do then is look at what those specific hazards are and make sure that we're doing the right things to mitigate those or eliminate those as much as possible. So it's everything from what our lighting plan is, and are we ensuring that we're not providing glare, our vehicle lights not causing blindness of drivers that are driving next to our workspace. Are we scheduling things so that we're reducing fatigue or the opportunity of fatigue as much as possible? Those are the kinds of things that we want to look at to reduce risk at night.
Great. Thank you, Dave. And so just to kind of follow on to that question, Dave, and anybody else on the panel, please feel free to jump in if I don't call on you and you have something to say. But how is there a nexus between working at night or fatigue, let's just say fatigue, long shifts, and struck by incidents? Does a worker being tired tie in? Is there any data that might show that, or even anecdotal information?
Absolutely, Brad. We have a lot of literature that looks at the fact that fatigue causes us to make mistakes. And when we're working around high-risk situations such as traffic passing by or working around heavy vehicles and equipment, those mistakes can indeed be deadly. So fatigue is a problem in that it affects our cognitive ability, it affects our decision-making ability, our reaction times, our situational awareness, and all these are critical when we're working in dangerous situations. From a mitigation standpoint, we want to look at having an overall fatigue management program within our construction company that takes a look at everything such as scheduling and ensuring that our workers have an understanding of fatigue and the contributors to fatigue and how to manage fatigue and those sorts of things. The National Cooperative Highway Research Program put out, I think it was in 2013, and I'm looking for it here as I'm talking, but a publication on managing fatigue in rapid renewal projects, and I would highly recommend folks take a look at that for more details. That was published in January of 2013 in the Transportation Research Record.
Okay, thank you.
And Brad, if I could, Brad, this is Scott. If I could just add a few thoughts here. Fatigue is not only important for the workers themselves, but it's also important for the drivers going through the work zones. And frequently, if you got workers or folks that are driving vehicles that are fatigued, that can create as many problems as the fatigue amongst the workers themselves. And I wanted to say along those lines is that NIOSH has recognized the importance of fatigue. And so just in the last couple of weeks, our director, Dr. John Howard, has decided to stand up a center for worker fatigue to really dig into this issue and look at it not only for construction and work zones, but really for all industries because it's such an important issue.
Yeah, and this is Travis. I'd like to jump in here a little bit too. And working at night is inherently more dangerous for several reasons. And one of them, it seems to be that the drivers from the public are definitely driving faster, and a lot more big trucks are on the road at nighttime, and fatigue setting in there. So I think some research also from the Texas Transportation Institute came out several years ago that when there is an incident at night in a work zone, the incident is also more severe. I think there's more damage done, it's more dangerous, and there's more cost to the contractor for whatever reason. It's probably increased speeds, and it's more traumatic. So absolutely. And also when it comes to fatigue, it seems to be a hot topic in the last couple of years because the National Safety Council has also done some recent work on that, and they have a web page about it, and we can add that to materials. So thank you.
Good. So let me throw a question out here because there's several that will follow on to it. But we're seeing a grouping of questions, both submitted previously and currently online, dealing with, in the roadway construction industry sector, what is the primary cause of struck by? I mean, do we blame the motorist for intrusions into the work zones and striking workers? We see those almost regularly in headlines. Sometimes those are fatalities, serious injuries. Or is it the large construction equipment that's striking workers? Any of you would like to care to respond on what is our biggest hazard here and how do we address those? Maybe we can start with Jerral on that one. I think everybody probably has something to say, and then go to Dave Dostaler.
Brad, yeah, thank you. So,
Jerral,
let's control what we have in our work zone.
Jerral?
I'm sorry, Jessica.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
We're losing you. I don't know if there's a good spot, but I only caught a few words of your explanation.
Okay, let me. First of all, inside the construction, things that we have control. So there needs to be a process in place with every employee inside the home equipment. And we believe that plan today to plan the task at hand throughout the day, and then make sure everyone stands timeout controlled at any point to regroup and adjust the game plan. So it's all this conversation out within control. So there needs to be a process associated with that on every equipment inside that work zone, and every employee must understand the plan associated with it and then adjust to it. It's key. So minimize or backing. If you do back, you use a spotter. When you have equipment that are parked, we use flags on that equipment on front and back corners. Everybody must do a 360 to make sure that when you do get in that piece of equipment to drive off, that you know you've got 360-degree clearance around you. That's part of the plan. But all those things are key as far as keeping from construction equipment running into a piece of equipment or a person. You have to have a process, and everyone on that job must understand that process. On external factors, it comes down to when you're relying on third-party motorists, it gets scary because we don't have control over the motorist. So that's where the external traffic control is so essential to ensure that we are truly meeting and or exceeding the standards set up for work zone traffic control, ensuring that it's visible, it's clear, and it's at least meets and hopefully above the standard of expectation for traffic control. And then the proper use of TMAs to help protect the workers on the ground and having them placed in the appropriate position.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerral. Dave, how did you respond to that?
Well, from our own internal data anyway, we're our own worst enemy. We have way more incidents inside of our work zone than we have vehicle intrusions, thankfully. The vehicle intrusions get a lot of attention because they tend to be more extreme, and that is an element that is harder to control on the job. So for the things that we have happen inside of the work zones, we can typically handle our own work and our subcontractors and things like that, but the vehicle intrusions, even though they're less, they do tend to raise the eyebrows a little more because they're a little scarier. So that's where we have to rely on, obviously, the standard traffic control plan to limit the ability for vehicles outside of our zone to get into the inside, assuming it's not a mobile operation.
Good. Anyone else want to comment on that before I have a kind of a follow-on?
Yeah, this is Travis.
Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, depending on the data and when you looked at it recently, back 15, 20 years ago, I think it was about 50-50 to answer your question about whether it was work zone intrusion related or internal. But as years have went on, those numbers have went up and down. But typically it's about 50-50 on both equal parts on both sides. But I really think, and I'm representing the workers here, and on the internal traffic controls, and with all the advanced technology that's coming about, and all these new technologies with proximity devices and eliminating backing, establishing internal traffic controls, on the worker side of the barriers, I really think if we increase technology usage, planning and training, and then fund the correct mechanisms, we can almost eliminate this problem on the worker side. Again, as Jerral mentioned, the traveling public's another animal to control altogether, and we're constantly working on that every day. But when it comes to the worker side, over the last 10 years or so, I've seen a lot of increase in good technologies and best practices that we can really nip this problem in the bud when those practices are followed.
Thank you, Travis. And just as a follow-up, the question that came in online about which type of construction equipment is the most dangerous. And according to the data that we have seen, and it's been consistent for a number of years, is it's the large dump trucks that have the huge blind areas or blind spots that are consistently the most dangerous piece of construction equipment that's striking workers. Outweighing most of the other type of equipment, it's those dump trucks. All right, so jumping to this question, and this one we get a little more, I don't know if the right word is political, but I know that there's a lot of tension sometimes in the industry between the public sector and the private sector, but we've got questions about, are we doing enough to use positive separation or positive protection using the newest technologies there to protect the workers from those intrusions, and what are the limitations of those? So why don't we start with Dave Fosbroke on that, and then open that up for the other panel members to talk about positive separation.
Thanks, Brad. Let me start with the sort of what are some of the limitations, some of the risks, and I think part of the balance is a sort of a risk-reward. The reward being the amount of protection, the risk part being the exposure of that. And when I say that, you need to think about the length of time that the operation is in place versus the length of time that it might take to place the positive protection, because when the positive protection is being placed, you have workers who are exposed to being struck by passing motors. So I think that's a significant thing that needs to be put into consideration. For long-term projects, the positive protection is clearly the way to go in terms of providing the most protection on the job site in the workspace. But like I say, you have to kind of consider, what is the job of putting out those devices as well. In terms of the motorist and intrusion as well, when you have positive protection and you have it appropriately laid out and designed, it gives clear indication for the motorist as where they're supposed to be. You resist the temptation to cut in between barrels and all those sorts of things. So there are lots of advantages. And now I'll pass that on to someone else from there.
Travis?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is education and kind of not doing things the way we've always done it. Most people on the call may or may not know that the federal highway system is based on a low bid. So sometimes, unfortunately, whenever something's based on a low bid, a lot of shortcuts get taken. And some of the positive protection measures that prevent this from happening in the first place when it comes to work zone intrusions or mainly work zones and intrusions, just aren't deployed out there because of cost, short duration projects, and just making that low bid. So there are ways to get funding out there that people might not even be aware of, like what do they call them, highway improvement safety projects, the 90-10 funds that you can get that don't affect that low bid. We got Jerral on the phone. I think Texas DOT several years ago, whenever we're trying to work on this problem, did a carve out for safety, so that they put safety apart. Maybe you can speak more to that as not part of the bid, because a lot of contractors are telling us that they want to put all these things in place, but all of it costs money. And I think financially, the economics of it is maybe a deterrent at times.
Yeah, Jerral, can you respond to some of this?
So, yeah, thank you, Travis. You and David both. You hit on some, great points and right on target. But yes, Texas, we had to do more. So we set aside a dollar figure to be used as an investment fund to help improve safety on our construction projects. And our area engineers and our contract superintendents cooperatively make a decision together that we need to add additional features that weren't originally planned. And we have set funding aside to invest in this. And this has certainly helped us in ensure safer work zones throughout the state for us, and has played a big part for us. And David hit right on with, considering positive protection or not. But I'll go back to it is so important that our workers on the ground, that we have to coach up and educate to follow the process of the planned work zone that decision makers have made for that particular work zone, and set it up properly and maintain it properly. That's one of the challenges we have internally in the industry, is setting it up and maintaining it properly.
And one idea in addition to that is every state DOT runs their own program within different, and they're all different. So one idea is to, as many states as we can, get it in the specifications up front, so everybody can bid on an even playing field for everyone. So that way they don't feel like they're short on safety.
So in situations, let's talk about short-term, short-duration projects. Now, we do know there are newer, more portable, more mobile barriers that are available. But what about law enforcement? How does that play into that, in those situations where perhaps you can't put a positive barrier out there? Is that effective? David, do you want to respond to that first, and then we'll have both Davids talk about that.
Yeah, this is Dave Dostaler. We've had very good luck having UTC out there on the project sites, helping slow down traffic and coerce people to do what they should be doing anyways. And in many cases, the client's actually been willing to help with the costs of that as well. So it hasn't been as much of a push, but you can definitely tell the difference out there on the sites once we have a uniform traffic control out there helping slow traffic down.
And Dave Fosbroke?
Yeah, Brad. This is Dave. So once again, I will kind of bring up, you have to consider the risk of what you do. And one of the points I'd like to point out is to make sure that we are not wind up using law enforcement as what I refer to as human crash cushions. The easiest place sometimes to put law enforcement is in that buffer space as traffic is entering the work zone. And that's understandable for visibility, but we need to keep in mind that buffer space has a actual intention, which is that, a motorist who maybe doesn't get over in time or whatever and winds up intruding into the workspace, they have space to, regain control, come to a stop before hitting anything important. And I would argue that a cruiser is important. And we have indeed had cases where we've had police officers who have been seriously injured or killed where they've been struck doing their duties of trying to slow down traffic at work zones. So that's just one side thing I want to mention to keep in consideration is that they also should be a part of that internal traffic control plan, and that requires good coordination between your law enforcement agency that is going to provide that service and the contractor in the state.
Great, thank you. So let's move a little bit now to a group of questions.
Brad,
Oh, go ahead, Jerral.
No, I was going to say, Dave is right. The challenge with this in the state of Texas is proper placement of police personnel inside the work zone. And there's work to be done around the country on this. We're doing a good job of putting more zones, but sometimes they're positioned, it creates an unsafe condition. Creates unsafe conditions for them. The second problem that not mentioned so far, police assistance, is many times that they're able to write a ticket if they're hired to work in the work zone. And that's something that needs to be worked out from legal authorities, but they should be able to, we should be able to hire them, place them within the work zone, and they be able to stop motorists and ticket as necessary.
Thank you. Okay, so we want to move to a group of questions that are talking about improved technologies, old and new. Everything from backup alarms to cameras to sonar. What is the importance of this? So, kind of the first question is does all equipment require backup alarms? What is the possibility of having cameras, technical feasibility, cost feasibility, and what other technologies are out there that can help address all this? So, Travis, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, as far as the OSHA regulations, and it's in some circumstances, and especially when vehicles have an obstructive view, that's when the regulation comes in, and there has to be a backup alarm. And if you don't have a backup alarm, if you have an older piece of equipment or something's faulty or out of sorts, you can always use a spotter as well whenever you don't have that. But it is required when you don't have it, when you have an obstructive view behind you. As we've already talked about, a lot of these vehicles have some blind spots, especially the dump truck and other bigger vehicles on the worker side. So backup alarm or spotter is required when you have that. And it's always just the best practice and idea. And I think as we get technology increases, it is getting more and more able to afford. Such as cameras years ago were very expensive, but now it's pretty much standard practice in a lot of vehicles that there might be a camera there. So,
Dave or Scott, do you want to talk about some of the NIOSH? I know NIOSH has done a lot of research in this area. A lot of it's been in the mining sector, but there's been quite a bit of research on the cameras and other technologies.
You want to do this, Scott, or you want me to?
Why don't you go ahead, Dave?
Okay, I'll start, then you can add in if you would. Yeah, there is equipment that is actually OEM now on some of the large mining equipment and earth equipment for earth-moving operations. And some of this equipment involves GPS, obviously video as well, and radar systems. In the research we did in work zones, we were able to adapt camera systems, what was that now, 10, 15 years ago, to dump trucks, and they were able to be used and were useful. But what we have found in our work so far has been that it's been a combination of video cameras with proximity warning detection, particularly in terms of radar. There's also some promise in terms of radio frequency ID, and some of that's being used particularly in underground mining as well as in surface mines that have kind of a fixed site where you have control over who comes in and who goes out. I would say we are not there yet, but each year we're making more and more progress in the area of having technology that will allow us to do a better job of identifying when someone is at risk of being run over and then providing a chance for the operator, or for that matter, for the worker, to move such that that doesn't happen. In the meantime, we have to lean heavily on best practices, such as internal traffic control plans, such as when you're using spotters, having training of spotters and equipment operators so that when the spotter goes out of sight, the operator comes to a complete stop doesn't assume they know that that the spotter is safe and out of the way, but is actually comes to a stop until they locate the spotter again. The spotter comes back into, say, the mirror view or direct line of sight. So do you have anything to add to that, Scott?
The one thing I would mention, I mean, there has been a fair amount of internal work done at NIOSH, but we've also, funded other universities, and CPWR in particular has done some really good work. So if you're interested in some of the small studies that have been done through CPWR, there was a study in 2017, this is available on their website, called Improving Work Zone Safety Utilizing a New Mobile Proximity Sensing Technology. There was some work done out of Georgia Institute of Technology that's very good information. Also, there was work done out of UNLV. This actually just came out last year on embedded safety communication systems for robust hazard perception of individuals in work zones. And then the last one I wanted to point out, and it's actually a pretty comprehensive study done out of Oregon State University in March of 2018. And again, this is available on their website, Reducing Highway Construction Fatalities Through Improved Adoption of Safety Technology. And that's a very, very comprehensive report. And then there's a published article that goes along with this. It really talks about a whole myriad of different types of technologies that are being used to improve work zone safety.
Great information. Thank you so much. Well, it's lucky to have Travis on the phone. One of the questions that came in earlier, and it's probably a question for all. When we're talking about the struck by and controlling traffic and controlling construction vehicles on the roadway and trying to prevent the struck by incidents, there we have a complex environment. We have OSHA regulations that typically cover the occupational safety, but then those interact with regulations by the Federal Highway Administration and the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices and all the temporary traffic control regulations. And now in fairly recent years, we've seen the introduction of new ANSI standards on work zone safety. Some people say, how do these all things interrelate, and what has precedence over the other? And Travis Parsons with the Laborers chairs the ANSI committee that's looking at the work zone standard. And matter of fact, that's under review right now. So Travis, why don't you take a stab at answering some of that confusion and how all these things interrelate with each other?
Okay, I'll jump right in here. It's A1047 is the work zone standard at ANSI. So let me talk about that first and then go through some of the other stuff. So when it comes down to it, that is a voluntary consensus standard. So it's basically an industry standard that's recognized as best practices in the industry. And the best thing about ANSI standards, especially the A10 standards, is everybody's at the table. That's what makes it a consensus standard. The labor unions are there, contractors are there, consultants are there, government's there. It's a very strategic, strict policy to get an ANSI standard published. There's 75 different people that vote on standards, so it really ends up becoming a good product. And as Brad said, we are in the process of revamping the current ANSI standard. It should be out next year after we go through the voting process. We're close to finishing right now with the review, and it has to go through the voting. So that's ANSI 1047. There's a lot of best practices in there that would go above and beyond OSHA standards. So one people that understand is OSHA is the law, but that is the floor. That's where you start, and that's the minimum requirements when it comes to worker safety. So a lot of good things about ANSI standards in general, and also the A10 standards for worker safety, are they take it a little bit above and beyond OSHA standards for best practices. So OSHA is the law. This is a consensus standard. And then, to further complicate matters in the highway industry, you got the MUTCD, as Brad just referenced. And I would call that like the rule of land and or the Bible for the work zone industry that a lot of people outside of the industry doesn't even know exists. So what OSHA has done with that, and especially Part 6, which is temporary traffic control, which is much of what we're talking about today, is cross-referenced via OSHA. So that makes it kind of part of the OSHA law when it comes to traffic control. So anything followed in the MUTCD, I think they're up to the year 2009 is what the year that they reference right now in the OSHA standards. And they do update that occasionally. Just not too long ago, it was only updated up to the 1970s. They just recently updated some of that with what they call the OSHA SIP program. So again, OSHA is the law. You have best practices with ANSI, and then OSHA also cross-references the MUTCD. So I hope I didn't muddy the waters too much there. So thank you.
Thanks. Dave Dostaler, any additional thoughts there?
No, not really. I mean, most of the standards that we have available to us out in the field anyways, obviously we use whatever's the most stringent and the most helpful. And there's a lot of great resources out there. So I've just implored anyone that hasn't already had the opportunity to do so is take advantage of a lot of these resources that are being mentioned today and do some digging for yourself and see what other type of helpful tools and standards are floating out there. There's a lot of people that have done a lot of wonderful work for our industry.
Thank you. So as we're getting short on time, and for those who have joined us, the panels have agreed to run a little bit over because we do have a lot of questions. But for those who may need to get off out on schedule at 3 o'clock Eastern time, I'd like to move a little bit to training because that is a lot of what we've talked about here today, and the tools that have been prepared in advance of this stand down. So let's start with the contractor, and then we'll move over to labor, and then to the DOT, and then to NIOSH. Each of you take a stab at this. What is the most effective way to train workers in this environment to avoid struck by incidents? Is there a magic bullet? Is there a best way, or maybe there's ways that are not effective? But how would you say what is the best way to train the workers? So let's start with Dave Dostaler, then we'll move to Travis. Then we'll move to Jerral and finish with NIOSH.
Okay. If there is a silver bullet, I'm unaware of it. So we hit a couple different avenues because of our workers. They're all kind of different learning styles. So we do hit the employees at the very beginning when it comes to the new hire orientation. Obviously, roll them through that, and then we continue through formal and informal training sessions to continue to push this topic. So some more of the formal ones might be more classroom and group-oriented, and then some of the informal ones, and in some cases are the better ones, are the things that we send out to be done in the field where they actually have the opportunity, for an example, to hop up in a piece of machinery and look at the blind spots for themselves, because down on the ground you don't have that kind of appreciation for it. So you get some folks out of their normal comfort zone, and rather than just read them some information, let them actually take a look at what the other folks are looking at. And some of that training has worked out the best for us.
Thank you. Travis, you deal with a large labor workforce.
Yeah, great question, Brad. A very broad but good question to tackle here. And as we saw in your earlier slides of the data, Toolbox Talks are one of the most significant things that we can do out there when it comes to training. If there's a silver bullet, that seems to be it, whether you're in construction, building a building, or on the roads, for all struck by incidents. So Toolbox Talks are very important when they're done correctly. And I think along the last speaker, what he was just talking about is it really needs to be custom fit for the audience. So what I mean by that is you have frontline workers, you have supervisors, you have new workers, you have workers that have been around a while, maybe need some refresher training. So you've got to custom fit your training to the needs. A lot of that is classroom training. Some of it's on-the-job training. And I think training happens, I love it whenever they do it every shift, at the beginning of the shift, or at least every day, depending on how the job's being run. But it is, there's no silver bullet to your question. But Toolbox Talks are recognized as one of the most effective ways of training. And then when you get down to the supervisors, you need a lot more expertise. You need a lot more soft skills than your frontline workers. They need to be able to lead people, able to make critical decisions on traffic control setup, work with the engineers, work with upper management. So there's a lot more involved when it comes to being a foreman or supervisor on the job. And actually, ARTBA, Brad is our host here, is one of the hosts here. They have a supervisor training. It's all virtual, right, Brad? Am I correct?
Yes, correct.
So there is a supervisor training available through ARTBA. I think that's gotten really high praise. It's been around for a couple of years now, and it's really effective at helping, people in the foreman, supervisor level get some skills that they may not have got on the job. So to answer your first question, I think it needs to be custom fit to the type of work or type of job task or risk that you're dealing with. And then if you want one answer, I think Toolbox Talks and every day, or at least every shift, or at least every day, is when I would recommend training.
Thank you. Let's jump over to Jerral and talk about training.
Brad, David, and Travis, we call it play of the potential. It's a must to cover the potential of the day and what we're going to do injury or incident. Do high rotation, day one, full percent, keep them for a week, 2, whatever. Separate some words on training, 2 different approaches. So we have training supervisors, and then we come in with our workers. It's a different approach. And the last thing I'll say is hand. For our workers down on the ground, we get out in the field and hands-on and real-world experience. That's where they retain, and it's made a difference for us. Thank you.
Thank you. NIOSH, you want to wrap that up?
Hey, I'd be glad to just say a few words about especially about the Toolbox Talks. I know that NIOSH and CPWR have jointly developed a whole series of Toolbox Talks for the construction industry, and we've not only developed them, but we've actually done some evaluations on, what's most effective in terms of being, received by the workers. And so one of the things that there's a paper just came out 2018 by Eggeriff and Cunningham and Flynn. They've done some great work on training and Toolbox Talks, but they talk about the importance of including, sort of narratives and like case studies and that sort of thing in the training, so it's can be better received by the workers. The other thing is in the construction industry, there's a lot of Hispanic workers, and so training needs to be culturally literate, culturally applicable, and also in the proper language, because many of these workers may not speak English all that well.
Thank you. So let's not forget Brad. The monkey in the room. Oh, go ahead. Was someone going to comment?
Yeah, Brad, this is Dave from NIOSH.
Yeah.
The other thing I would want to do on training is 2 words come to mind that I think are really important, one of which is continual. It's not just an event that happens. And the other goes back to something Jerral said very early on, which is, at some point you need to stop, take time out, and figure out what's going on right now. And that's the time when your training is going to be most effective. So it becomes something that does indeed happen on a daily process. And not only on a daily process, but maybe even within a shift when you change your operation. Then it becomes important. We find that when we go from steady mainstream paving and the pavers going full tilt and the trucks are coming as fast as they can, we didn't find a whole lot of incidences, shall we say. But it was those times when you stopped from that and you were moving the paving equipment back to start a new lift, or a piece of equipment broke down or something like that. That was when you started to get conflicts between the workers who were on foot and the equipment that was moving around. So I would say you need to stop and take a time out anytime there's a major shift in what the work is, and that is a prime training opportunity.
Thank you,
Brad,
David.
if I could add one other thing about this whole training issue, another aspect of this is, again, trying to include case studies that are relevant. And there have been a significant number of case studies that have been developed based upon NIOSH's fatality assessment and control evaluation program. For example, ARTBA, your organization, has developed some really, really very well-done animated videos based upon fatalities that occurred. And those are available, I think, on YouTube. And then also there's a whole series of about 30 different case studies for fatality investigations that are available on a NIOSH document called Building Safer Highway Work Zones. This is an older document from 2001, but it's got 30 different case studies in the back of that thing that could be extremely helpful for people that are developing training materials.
Great, Scott. And Scott, why don't you just stay on here because, being with NIOSH and part of CDC, we can't really ignore the monkey in the room with this COVID-19 pandemic and start with the question that a lot of people are asking. We know that the workers, construction workers, and particularly some subsectors have been deemed essential, but that creates challenges in trying to comply with CDC and OSHA guidelines, particularly like 6-foot distancing, which makes it very hard in transferring workers in vehicles to job sites. I think everybody probably has something to say about it, but let's start with you, Scott, and how do we deal with some of these issues of having more vehicles perhaps on the road, going back and forth and in and out of job sites to try to comply with recommendations from CDC, NIOSH, and OSHA on how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure, absolutely, Brad. Thank you. This is a top priority for NIOSH and for CDC. A lot of work's been done. I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of folks in the construction industry that have developed guidance as well, such as ARTBA and CPWR. Association of General Contractors has put things together, the laborers. So there's a lot of good information out there. But the bottom line is, the focus for the construction industry is really just kind of, separation and sort of disinfection and things like that. So in addition to the 6-foot separation, some other things that folks might want to think about in terms of, keeping folks apart is potentially trying to look at staggering work schedules, providing alternating work days or extra shifts to reduce the total number of workers on a job site. Also, to think about restricting access to the number of workers in enclosed or confined areas, such as on trailers that are on work sites, or if there's a break area or toilets, that sort of thing. Just kind of restricting access there. And then there's also a big need to just sort of disinfect areas where that are frequently touched. Trying to make sure that workers that are working using various tools are not exchanging those tools, or if they do get exchanged, that they get disinfected between that, and then just trying to minimize as much as possible in-person interactions that are close. But if you are in a particular situation, we have to work very close with another worker. NIOSH is recommending the use of face coverings, or for that matter, masks or other types of devices that have higher efficiency. But those are all beneficial in helping to prevent the spread of COVID.
Thank you. I'll jump to you, Dave Dostaler. You participated in a webinar earlier this month talking about how the industry is reacting and protecting workers during this environment. Why don't you go next on this?
Yeah, this has been a real interesting challenge for us. For the last 10 years, we've been doing our best to try to get all these vehicles outside of our work area, and now suddenly we're having to invite them back in. So part of that internal work plan that we have to keep people straight and away out there in the sites is to designate some additional parking areas to get people closer to the work. And it was already mentioned, but staggering some of the shift starts has also been helpful. And then obviously we've taken on the same approach with the face coverings and, of course, sanitizing vehicles, work areas, and any area that might be common use to help address these concerns. So that's been some of the items that we've done.
Okay, Travis, I know this has been a big deal for the laborers. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, a lot of those same stuff that everybody's just talking about. They can't emphasize enough social distancing or physical distancing, whatever you want to call it, the proper hand hygiene, proper cough etiquette, just training workers on how to respond to that kind of stuff, how to do it appropriately, staggering work shifts. One of the big ones for us, we're getting a lot of questions about, especially speaking of highway jobs, is availability of water. You would think that water is inherently available in jobs, but it's really not always available. So making sure you plan ahead. If you can have hand washing on a job, temporary wash stations have adequate supply of water and soap. If you can't do soap, you need to use hand sanitizer. There are some bleach water solutions out there that are recognized as sanitation, but be careful with that one, because what we found with that anecdotally in the last month or so, as much as we want to advise people on how to do a solution, they don't follow the rules. So basically what I mean by that is they're not very accurate on the mixing process unless somebody's doing it up front. So that goes back to your plan. So soap and water is the best case scenario. If you can't have that, have hand sanitizer. And then if you're out of hand sanitizer, you can't buy it, you don't have water and soap, and yes, you can use these bleach water solutions, but be careful about how you're mixing it, because that can really cause some problems for dermal issues for workers and dermatitis. And, you know, you're already out there working with dust and concrete and caustic nature of things, so you don't want to increase that with bleach and water solutions. So water is a big issue, especially on road jobs. Also, Scott hit it on the head. You know, limit your exposures in confined spaces, not just like confined spaces when we're here in construction, but trailers. Porta potties are a big issue. You know, who's cleaning the porta potties? Do you have a third-party vendor that's supplying all the things we just talked about? Is it the cleaning of those porta potties been increased? Are you assigning that to your workers? Are you protecting the workers that are doing the cleaning? And then we recommend, I know we have a big shortage right now in healthcare, and there's a big shortage of N95 and respirators, but if you're doing a lot of this cleaning process as a laborer and stuff, you know, voluntary use of N95s or half-face for those individual workers when they got to get within 6 feet or work with some other toxic materials. And then the last thing I'd like to emphasize that we're running into right now, because of the shortage of N95 respirators and even voluntary use, then the construction workers are still facing other hazards such as silica and that has a permissible exposure limit and other, you know, solvents out there. Just because there's a shortage doesn't mean you don't have to protect them with the appropriate respiratory protection for those hazards as well. So anecdotally, we've seen on jobs where they're just wearing masks, which is beneficial and is being highly recommended to help create, you know, break the curve or prevent the spread, but that is not answering your question when it comes to something that has an existing problem such as silica. So you still need to follow the respirator standard. You still need to have the appropriate protections for those hazards out there.
Thank you, Travis.
Brad, the one other thing I didn't mention, but I should, is that the NIOSH director, Dr. Howard, is going to be leading a webinar that CPWR and the Association of Union Constructors is hosting on Wednesday at 11 a.m. for anyone that's interested.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Jerral, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, Brad. Scott, David did an outstanding job expressing what they needed, and just appreciate their comments.
Thank you. So folks, we're kind of winding out of time. There's been a number of really good questions that have come in that we just haven't had time to address, or perhaps not the right people on the panel. I noticed we had a number of questions come in on temporary traffic control, questions about can we increase the distance in the buffer space to, you know, to give automobiles more time to recover, I assume is the question behind that. Also about the use of zipper merging, and a number of very, very good questions there. I mean, I guess I would just, many of us would be available to answer some of these questions after if you would like to follow up. And if not this panel, there are others who can talk about these that are more specialized in temporary traffic control. And there's also been a lot of questions about who is being struck. Is it the flagger? Is it, you know, what is the occupation of the person being struck? I've not seen that kind of detail come out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but just from what I read in the news reports, I don't think flaggers are at much greater risk than just other types of workers. It seems to be there's kind of just a general across the board who are being struck by there. But I will give all the panelists just one quick moment to make a final comment on this, and then we will wrap up our presentation. I should also add that the data center at CPWR has done a great job compiling a lot of the information that is available. They put together a little question and answer sheet based on some of the questions that came in earlier that we just did not have time to get to. That will be posted on the website, along with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that we've shared with you today. and again, a lot of other resources. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up, and let's go ahead and just start with Scott, then we'll do Dave Fosbroke, Jerral, Dave Dostaler, Travis, and who did I leave off? I think we got everybody there. So.
Okay, thanks, Brad. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who called in and participated, but I also want to thank each of the panelists for great answers to the questions they provided, but also the Construction Sector Council work group, yourself, Brad, as well as Eileen Beatty, Mike Mills, Alan Echt, and the rest of the work group that was involved in helping to organize this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dave?
This is Dave Dostaler. Yeah, I would like to echo the same comments. Thanks for putting this together. It's valuable information. And my recommendation for everybody that's participating out there is, once again, to take advantage of those resources that are out there, and you're going to find a lot of gold nuggets out there that are going to help you in your continued quest, just like ours, to eliminate worksite injuries from all sources. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. Travis, wrap-up comments.
Yeah, just like everybody else said, thank you for inviting me to be on this. It's a pleasure to be on this call, this important situation there, and that we handle both for our workers and our traveling public. And I guess I'd like to end with watch out for being distracted. I'm looking in the mirror when I say that, and it's easier said than done, but I mean both distracted driving and distracted workers. So it's easy in today's day and age to be distracted with our cell phones and other things while we're driving. And, there's all these technologies within the car, and it seems like as time goes on, we're more and more distracted. That's in the car. Now, also for our workforce, when we're walking around jobs, there's all kinds of distractions. So stay focused and avoid distractions of all kinds, whether you're on foot or in a car. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jerral.
Just wanting listeners to develop a game plan and a process to eliminate struck-by incidents. Make it your stamp on it, get employee involvement, and you will have success. And coach the follow-through. Make sure your employees are following through with it day in and day out. I want to thank ARTBA and NIOSH. You guys are helping us here in the state of Texas. Made a huge difference for us. It's been an honor and privilege to serve today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jerral. Dave Fosbroke.
Well, thanks, everybody who was on the panel. Excellent answers to these questions. I actually want to finish on a note that Jerral mentioned early on, which was that for TxDOT, they came to a point where they just had to stop and say, we need to change what we're doing. And I think for everyone who has registered and joined the call today, hopefully you all will do the same thing. You will stop, look at what you're doing, see what others are doing, some of which you've heard today, and try to do something different so that we can make progress. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone who has participated, both those who have attended and those who are on the panel. We really appreciate your time and your feedback. Again, to mention, this is National Work Zone Awareness Week. This is the first day of the week, and what a better way to start it off than to talk about our number one hazard of struck-by incidents. I hope both as workers and as motorists we will pay more attention and just show our gratitude to these workers who are out working as essential workers, keeping our transportation system up and running throughout this pandemic and always. We owe them a great deal of gratitude for that effort. And again, thank you for all of you for participating. Again, anyone who would like to follow up with additional questions, my email address is bsantbsant@artba.org. I'll be glad to redirect questions. Again, also please go to the CPWR website that was indicated here on this final slide that's up here for a lot more information. And again, thank you to all those who behind the scenes have made this work, especially Eileen and Jessica at CPWR. for their great work and putting all this together. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next year at a live event, let's hope. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.